Hey everyone, Rabbit here, and today I'm going to be showing y'all the most complicated and honestly most frustrating crafting mechanic that Last Epoch has to offer. But once you learn it, you can use it to make some insanely good items, and I'm going to be showing you a step-by-step tutorial on how you can go about crafting some insane items. I'll also be providing you a spreadsheet that can sort of help guide your crafting process a little bit, and I'll also be providing a really nice tool that the community has put together that you can use to deterministically craft exactly the experimental items that you're looking for. So with that being said, let's jump straight into it, and I hope you enjoy. So the crafting mechanic I'm talking about is experimental affix crafting through the use of Glyphs of Insight. I'm going to be covering how you acquire these glyphs, what they do, and some tools you can use to make your crafting process a lot less stressful. Glyphs of Insight are acquired by sealing experimental affixes on gear using Runes of Research, both of which are dropped from exiled mages in the Monoliths of Fate. So what do these glyphs do? Basically, when you upgrade a prefix on an item using this glyph, instead of upgrading the prefix, it will convert that prefix into an experimental affix. The type and tier of the affix that is put on the item is determined by a few different factors that are different for each type of item that they can go on. Experimental affixes can be put on gloves, boots, or belts. Each item can have 4 different affixes put onto it. The tier of the affix that is rolled is based on the same factors across all items. It starts at tier 1 and then goes up a tier for each of these conditions. If the item has 2 suffixes of the same tier at the time of the craft, if the item has a sealed affix of tier 2 or higher, if the item has a tier 7 prefix, and lastly, if the item is exalted. Each of these conditions will provide +1 to the final tier of the affix when they are met, with a maximum of tier 5. The type of affix that is put on the item is a bit more complicated as its conditions are different for each item type. Again, each item type can have 4 different affixes, and they cycle through each other based on the value of their condition. For gloves, the affix is determined by the total affix tiers on the item. For instance, if an item has 4 tier 1 affixes, it would have a total value of 4. For belts, the affix is determined by the level requirement of the item at the time of the craft. And for boots, the affix is determined by the amount of forging potential that the item has at the time of the craft. While all of this sounds pretty complicated, and it is, we have a nice tool on Tunklab.com that we can use to determine the exact affix and tier that we'll get when we craft our item. So here we are in Tunklab. I'll leave a link to this website in the description so you can use it, but let's say that we wanted to craft these gloves. So you can see that right off the bat we have a tier 7 prefix and a tier 2 prefix, as well as a tier 4 suffix, and no second suffix and no sealed affix tier. So if we were to upgrade the cast speed right now with a Glyph of Insight, it would turn into a tier 3 experimental ward per missing health, which you can see there. So right off the bat, if we wanted to turn this into a tier 5 item, what we could do is seal the tier 2 cast speed, which would remove the prefix and then put us at a 2 sealed affix tiers. And then we would craft a tier 1 prefix back onto the item so we could craft it. And then we would need to craft a second suffix and bring it up to tier 4. So this would be the minimum amount of work that we would need to get a tier 5 affix for this item. And if we were to craft it right now, you can see that we would be getting experimental armor applies to damage over time. Right? And with gloves, it's really easy because this is based on the total affix tiers on the item. All we have to do is upgrade the prefix and it will cycle through the 4 different experimental affixes that it can go on. So if we upgrade the tier 1 prefix, it would give us armor applies to damage over time. If we go to tier 2, we would get ward on kill. Tier 3, we would get dodge rating and endurance threshold. And then tier 4, we would get the ward per missing health. So this is just a quick demonstration on how you can use the tool to determine what you would be doing in the game. And you can use this tool to double check and tinker and mess around with all of the values to see exactly what affix and tier of affix you would be getting on the item that you're crafting. So the primary thing that makes this crafting method really annoying and a bit complicated and really heavily RNG based is that you can still get critical success crafts while you're sort of getting the item in the position that you want to do your experimental craft. So say you're upgrading the prefix tiers because you're trying to get to tier 4, that way you can get the ward per missing health. And when you upgrade it to tier 2, all of a sudden one of your suffixes jumps up to tier 5. Well, now what you have to do is you'd have to upgrade your other one to tier 5. And luckily, in this scenario, assuming you didn't critical craft again, you could still get what you wanted, right? But say you were doing that whenever you're going from tier 3 to tier 4, right? All of a sudden, you upgrade your prefix to tier 4, you critical craft the suffix up to tier 5, and now you would have to upgrade your second suffix to tier 5. And then what this would do is it would give you experimental ward on kill, and you couldn't change anything after that, right? You couldn't change the sealed affix, you couldn't change the suffixes, you couldn't change the prefix. You could only craft your experimental item at that point, which would give you your ward on kill, and so you would not be able to get anything else. So that's sort of the headache and the frustration and why this is the more complicated crafting mechanic in the game. But with good RNG, you'll be able to make exactly what you want. No promises. So I went ahead and made this little spreadsheet that you could use as sort of like a crafting guide to help you figure out what you need to do in order to craft your tier 5 experimental affix. So starting with the gloves, remember this is based on the total affix tiers. So at a minimum, to get tier 5, you're going to need a tier 7 prefix as well as a tier 2 seal affix, and then 2 suffixes that are the same tier. In this case, they could just be tier 1, but whatever matches it. And then at this point, if you had a tier 1 prefix, you would be at 12 total tiers, which would give you dodge rating and endurance threshold. And then if you upgraded it to a tier 2 prefix, you would get your ward per missing health. Tier 3, you get your armor applies to damage over time. And then finally, tier 4, you get your ward on kill. And then this will, these tiers will keep going up to 16, 17, and so on as you walk up your suffixes as well. But this would be the minimum. If you wanted the experimental ward per missing health, this would be sort of the minimum requirement for your suffixes, your prefix, and everything to get that. Down in the boots, it's based on forging potential. So the way that it works is that if the item has 1 forging potential, then you would have Frenzy and Frenzy Effect, and then it goes to Ward Gain on Traversal Skill, and then it goes to Minion Damage and Minion Teleport, and then Haste and Haste Effect. And then after that, it just cycles back through those same 4 over again. So again, the baseline, you would need a tier 7 prefix, a tier 2 sealed affix, any matching tier suffixes, and then any prefixes from tier 1 to 4. And then at that point, it depends on your forging potential. So I made a nice little formula that you can use to help figure out exactly what you're looking for. And so the formula is if you take the current forging potential on the item and then divide that by 4, the affix that you're going to be getting is dependent on whether or not there is a decimal or if it's a whole number. So example, if our forging potential is equal to 25 and we divide it by 4, you can see that it's 6.25. So according to the spreadsheet, if it has 0.25, that means that we're going to get Frenzy and Frenzy Effect, right? And so say if it had, 32, we divide it by 4, this is 8, so it's a whole number, which means we would be getting the Haste and Haste Effect. So it works the same way. If it's 0.5, you're going to get Ward Gain on Traversal Skill, and if it's 0.75, you're going to get your Minion Damage and your Minion Teleport. So at any point while you're crafting, you can just take your forging potential, divide it by 4, and depending on the decimal or whole number that you get, will tell you exactly what affix you would be getting at that given time. Moving on to belt. This is based on the level requirement of the item. And so at a baseline, if you were to craft a tier 5 experimental affix, again, you would need a tier 7 prefix, a tier 2 sealed affix, and then at minimum tier 1 on everything else. This would put you at level requirement 44, which would give you ward on potion use. The next thing you could do is upgrade the prefix to level 2, which would upgrade the level requirement to 46 to get your traversal cooldown recovery on potion use. And then if you upgraded it to 3, you would get your mana. And then here, if you upgraded it to 4, it wouldn't actually give you the volatile zombie. You actually have to upgrade your suffixes to tier 3 and have your prefix at tier 3. And that would give you the level 59 requirement to have the volatile zombie on potion use. These values can change, and it depends on like the belt and everything, because the level requirement of the base that you're using also matters. So down here at the bottom, the Praetorian belt is a extremely common base that most builds use in the end game because it has the highest amount of armor, and it is a level 66 minimum requirement on the belt. So the level requirement can't get any lower than 66. So right off the bat, if we plug in our basic values here, if we're at 7 on the prefix with 1, 1, 1, and 2, this would give you a tier 5 for traversal cooldown recovery on potion use because it's the minimum requirement of 66. If you wanted to raise the level requirement up to 67, you would have to upgrade your suffixes both to tier 4 as well as a tier 3 prefix. And that would give you the level 67 level requirement to give your volatile zombie on potion use. If you wanted to do the tier 5 ward on potion use, you would actually need a tier 2 prefix with 2 tier 5 suffixes. And that would bring the level requirement to 72, which would give you your ward on potion use. Now, if you're wanting tier 5 mana on potion use, you have to have a sealed tier 3 affix at this point, right? I tinkered around with all the values. If you can figure out how to do it any other way, then let me know. But if you have a tier 3 sealed affix and 2 tier 5 suffixes with a tier 1 prefix, that will raise the level requirement to level 73. Getting tier 3 sealed affixes is a bit hard because the chance is pretty low. So alternatively, if you wanted to settle for tier 4 mana on potion use, you could just do a tier 2 sealed affix, and you would actually have to have a tier 6 prefix, and that would be kicking down the level requirement, and it would bring you down to tier 4. And then you would just have your tier 2 prefix and 2 tier 5 suffixes, right? So again, just go into Tunklab, input your item, mess around with it, change the values, and figure out exactly what your item is going to be using. But if you need to, you can always come back to this spreadsheet and then use it as kind of like a little guide on what you're looking for on your items to get the affixes that you want. So there you have it. That is probably the most complicated mechanic that Last Epoch has to offer right now. But if you just use the tool on Tunklab and you utilize my spreadsheet, it's really not too hard. And even though you may brick a few items, you can make a few things that are extremely powerful and exactly what your build is looking for. So if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, leave a comment, make sure you subscribe, and come back for more informational Last Epoch content. Again, my name is Rabbit, and thank you for watching.